Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and I want to talk about the Granite Fang um, character ownership infrastructure that I am proposing for Dragon Masters to own the player characters that they create. And today, and for Dungeon Masters to own the non-player characters that they create. And apologies, we are in the deepest end of the pool here on intellectual property, art, literacy, ownership, currency, transactions. Apologies, but this video is part of a playlist, and you will not have the context to understand the language, the structures, the concepts that we're talking about if you have not watched the playlist to this point. Link below. Thank you very much for your patience with that. I try to make one serving content, but sometimes the topics are just so complicated that a playlist is required. So thank you. Today, what I'm going to talk about is two questions. Two questions. Does a Dragon Master own the player characters they create? And when does that ownership begin? All right, let's get into it. Okay, so here is what constitutes, in my humble opinion, ownership of a Dungeons & Dragons player character. You, as a Dragon Master, have sat down with a player's handbook, and you open up the player's handbook, you take a white piece of paper, you take a pen, and you ink down a player character with name, attributes, equipment, and at that point, that you have completed the first part of the social contract, which is the player character, Dungeons & Dragons player character sheet. I've spoken extensively about how important that is. That is a contract with, and at this point in the progress, only part of it has been achieved, but it's a contract with yourself. It's a contract with the player character. It's a contract with the Dungeon Master, and it's a contract with every future Dragon Master you will sit at the table with. Okay, so as a Dragon Master, you sit down, you create a player character with pen on a piece of paper. Okay, and when it is completed, then you do not own that player character. You do not own that player character. When you sit down with a Dungeon Master and they speak the first word of the first sentence of that session, you own that player character because the transaction is complete. You may be the only Dragon Master at the table. There may be other Dragon Masters at the table with you with their own player characters. But that's it. You as the Dragon Master at that point own that player character, not a minute before. Okay, let's answer some auxiliary questions and that answers both questions. Do you own it? Yes, you own it, in my humble opinion. Own it. Okay? And then when did you own it? When you sat down at a physical table with a physical PHB and made that character and wrote ink to the Dungeons & Dragons character sheet. All right? I also do want to acknowledge that that character sheet could be a blank piece of paper. You can write it. You don't need to use the printed form from the Dungeons & Dragons PHB. Okay, it could be a blank piece of paper. All right, but it does need to be written, and it does need to be inked down. Right, and it needs to be completed, and then the Dungeon Master has to speak the first word of the first sentence of the first session that player character is ever introduced into. At that moment, you own that character, in my humble opinion. Whoa, Scott. What about D&D Beyond characters? That's cute. You don't own nothing. All right. In my humble opinion, if you are playing Dungeons & Dragons Beyond, I think D&D Beyond, I do believe D&D Beyond carries Dungeons & Dragons canon. I am not currently convinced that someone sitting in Washington State playing Dungeons & Dragons with someone sitting in Florida over D&D Beyond has ever experienced Dungeons & Dragons. I think what they've done is they've done exactly what Baldur's Gate did. Done a very respectful, very accurate simulation of Dungeons & Dragons. I don't believe that online games are Dungeons & Dragons. And I certainly don't think that the one-cheeked effort of... Because the reality is, if you chose to do that, you could have played with somebody in your area. You could have. You can make whatever excuses you want, but that's it. People are surrounded by people, right? You know, there are no hermits in like, you know, forest shacks listening to this channel, right? Like, if you have other people around you, you chose to not do what Gary showed is Dungeons and Dragons. So I don't believe that online characters, that you own those. I don't believe you own those in any way. And quite frankly, literally, it can be taken from you at a moment's notice because they can shut the servers down anytime they want, right? So you quite literally don't own it, you know, like. But once you make that piece of paper, that's real, that's tangible. That's what Gary really showed us from the very beginning, and I think that's Dungeons and Dragons, and that's when you own that character. Every single word you just heard is my proposal for the Granite, is part of my proposal for the Granite Fang character ownership infrastructure, which I believe should be in the hands of the D&D community to define, and I am starting that definition here. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion, nothing more, nothing less. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic, preferably on an identity account. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.